Hello there, welcome back to another episode of Strife's Talking Points. And right now I'd like to do a real quick cover of Pete Buttgieg and his interview on Axios. I have a subscription to HBO. I've been slowly but surely watching the Axios programs as they come around. And Pete Buttigieg's interview here is very different than the previous interview I covered with Jared Kushner, and it's also much less, let's say, combative than what they've done with Sundar, the CEO of Google. So briefly, again, I'm not going to use the video this time because you can see some of my own information there, and I really don't want to have that out. Pete Buttigieg on Axios, HBO. Here we go. Transcript. Axios on HBO. The interviewer. Do acknowledge that 100,000 migrants crossing the southern border for the second month in a row represents a crisis. Buttigieg, it certainly represents a crisis largely of this administration's making. Now, with that answer, there was zero follow-up. No Q&A, no let me explain to me why that is, tell me more about it. This was strictly QA, seemingly the most prepared interview I've seen. There was no putting him on the spot, trying to follow up, explain your answer. It was just question, answer, question, answer, question, answer. Man was literally reading off a sheet and just recording his Q&A sessions with Pete. Which just astounds me that this is what is going to be journalism. Is President Trump right to ask for money for barriers and to toughen the vetting of people claiming asylum? And then he goes into a longer answer, which you can tell was definitely prepared. Look, it's worth having a conversation about border security in the context of comprehensive immigration reform. But Trump is wrong in his approach on the issue at every point. From near-term part, which is horrible policies like family separation. It's been going on for a decade now. And also kind of thoughtlessly using U.S. troops as props on the border, to the big picture, which is to say would not be such a problem if we had stability in Central American countries. Now, I don't know. There is no follow-up on this whatsoever. Again, these are just Q&A sessions. They're not pushing him to make an answer, to give them more information. They're just letting him answer, and they're not stopping him. Just, here's a question, I'll wait till you're done talking, and then I will ask you the next question, which I would almost assume that he was provided these in advance and then kind of softened up. The preview to the Axios show is them talking about how Pete is surging in the polls right now, how he's coming forward. So I'm going to switch real quick to CBS. This is the CBS poll from a few days ago. I would think that Axios prepared this interview a week or so in advance. What you have here is all other candidates out. 55% would support Biden, 49% Warren, Kamala Harris has 45%, Bernie's at 43%, Pete's at 32%. Likely Democratic voters. When you think about nominees, early voters show him in at 8%. He is the top of the bottom, basically. And then when they break it down by state, you see Iowa's at 11, New Hampshire's at 10, South Carolina, he's at 6. And they talk about, in the interview, he's beating the pants off Beto O'Rourke. Beto O'Rourke is a man who ran for Texas senator who lost to Ted Cruz. And if you don't know a lot about Ted Cruz as far as how people feel about Ted Cruz, he is one of the more disliked people of any party. That's hearsay, but I've heard it repeatedly from Democrats, Republicans all over the place when I watch and read their conversations about him. So you would see here in his current standings at 2%. Now, Axios is creating what I would like to call a fluff piece. I looked up Axios. They have about 11 million unique views, and they have 300,000 or so people in their mailing list, and they're following their as supporters through the internet there for them. And this is a major HBO show. I don't know how long this will work. And it turns out immigration is more useful to the president as a crisis unsolved than it would be an achievement if he actually fixed it. I can't see a statement in all of this that I disagree with more than that. If Trump had been able to build a border wall on the U.S. South and had been able to cut illegal immigration, I don't know that anything would bolster Trump's chances to be the next president of the United States or reelected than that. I believe that if the immigration crisis had been stopped, the border wall was up, and you now see that millions of illegals are being deported, I think that would be the biggest boon to Trump, period. Buttigieg continues, we could fix it. I mean, there's enough consensus among the American people and even in Washington about the terms of bipartisan comprehensive immigration reform, of which I've seen none. I went looking for stories about bipartisan comprehensive immigration reform. Everybody wants to do it, but no one agrees on what they want to do, which is why our Congress is frozen. And yet they still can't deliver because the president needs this to be a problem for his domestic political purposes. Again, a statement that I really do think there should be some pushback on and questioning. However, you'll see Axios' question follows. So you're saying the president is using the border crisis to get reelected. Buttigieg, the president needs the crisis to get worse, even though it makes a liar out of him. I don't think he's worried about that. He's worried about the ability to, and they actually interrupt him. You're not saying he's literally making it worse. Buttigieg, I don't think he cares if it gets worse, but he certainly doesn't benefit from comprehensively fixing the problem. That was Trump's main push in the election. Build the wall. Fix immigration. That's his campaign promise. And the Trump supporters I know and that I've seen on YouTube and I've seen in the news that I've read about, they're all pushing Trump to get this wall up. This is, and as we know, he's declared the national emergency. He's pushing the billions of dollars out of military funding to build the wall. And at every part of this that goes through, Democrats move to block him. They move to stop him in the courts. They're pushing so that he cannot fulfill the promises he's put up in the past. And I wouldn't put it past him to allow it to become worse in order to have a more divisive issue so he could benefit politically. Now, as someone who's following more of the stories, more of these political lines, more of the stuff going through, I actually just did a video on AOC calling their the border camps and the detention centers concentration camps, where people are held for 30 days and then released, or slightly more than 30 days, and lots of them are held for less than a day. I believe it was 70%. And that's the crisis. The crisis is coming from all the political people trying to gain traction and not actually solve the process. Going to skip to the next part of this. Again, like I said, I'm not going to reference the video directly. And this is the background they've got here. 2020 Pete. They are literally doing this in front of his own campaign slogan, and it is in the whole interview. That's what we're seeing. What he's saying, the president needs crisis to get worse, even if it makes a liar out of him, Buttigieg said in his campaign. I don't think he's worried about that. I think he cares if it gets better, but he certainly doesn't benefit from comprehensive fixing the problem. So on the cusp, what you're seeing is what they're saying here of the first debates 10 days from now, which I believe now it's coming very soon. This is a little bit older. The idea of this intellectual 37-year-old as commander-in-chief is no longer far-fetched. He's trailing about 8%. Again, we'd like to see this. More of what he said about Axios. He did have depression when he came back. However, now he's mayor. And this I found pretty funny about him. This video has now been deleted from Viacom, which is strange because this is the Axios site. However, it's banned in my country on copyright backgrounds. U.S., I rarely ever see that. Transcript. Republicans claim that John Kerry was a traitor in Vietnam, that Barack Obama was a Muslim. If you were to win the nomination, they'll say you were too young, too liberal, too gay to be commander-in-chief. You are young, you are liberal, you are gay. How will you respond? This is kind of funny, but I don't know how to take it. I'd respond by explaining where I want to lead this country. People will elect a person who will make the best president. And we have elected presidents who've been young. We've had excellent presidents who've been liberal. And I would imagine we've probably had excellent presidents who were gay. We just didn't know which ones. Axios. You believe we've had a gay commander-in-chief? I mean, statistically, it's almost certain. Statistics don't work like that. We've had 45 presidents of the U.S. If you use straight statistics, the variation would be so much more than what it actually is. The people who become presidents are political elites. They are extremely caught up in the majority of the public's view of politics, of all these different things. And no, statistically, it wouldn't show. If you've had a country predominantly 90% white, out of 45, yes, it is possible to have a minority president. However, I find that claim to be funny, interesting, all at the same time. Probably going to try and do some research on my own to see presidential leanings in a future video. What I found that hilarious and interesting at the same time. In your reading of history, do you believe you know who they were? Buttigieg, my blank, even doesn't work that well in the president, let alone retroactively, but one can only assume that's the case. So you have no evidence, you have no facts, you have no statistics, you have no references, you have no information whatsoever. However, that's where you choose to make the case. Again, for his early registration, he's at 2% behind Klobuchar, behind Beto O'Rourke overall, behind Harris, behind Sanders, behind Warren, behind Biden. But in one or two key states, he's got a slight lead over Buttigieg, or O'Rourke, but he is so far behind everyone else. Here is a basic stance of Pete Buttigieg's issues in under 500 words. And climate change. Supports Paris Climate Change Agreement and the New Green Deal, which New Green Deal itself has no reasonable things. It is just I would call it a pipe dream someone came up with. If they put some substantial information in there about different ways to do this, I would be interested in reading it. He thinks climate change is a national security threat. He is supportive of government-subsidized solar panels. Interesting. That would help some areas in the South, maybe in California. Capitalist says he's a capitalist, but that democracy is more important than capitalism. If you want to see what happens when you have capitalism without democracy, you can clearly see it in Russia. Which, that is a very odd thing for him to say you can very clearly see in Russia. Russia is what happens when you have a communist country fail and then try and use socialist policies, communist policies to reinvent capitalism. It doesn't work well without a complete deconstruction of the entire nation, and I mean down to the ground. So he's actually, to me, upside down on that one. That's a very odd thing. Immigration. Buttigieg supports providing a pathway to citizenship for dreamers. No other information is in there about what he thinks about border crisis, about illegals, about any of this other stuff. He just says dreamers. That is a very nondescript, non-anything way of just throwing out a thing people agree with the dreamers, and that's all. He supports updating the Civil Rights Act to explicitly apply to non-discrimination persecutions to the LGBTQ community. I'm really wondering what extra things they could add in there as far as exclusions to the civil or additions to the Civil Rights Act. He makes no different thing. Said on Meet the Press on abortion, Meet the Press, abortion is a question that is almost unknowable, a moral question that is not going to be settled by science, even though part of the life liberty is the whole idea of when does the baby become an actual human life versus when is it considered just a growth. So the best way is for settled by the practice in practice is by the person who actually faces the choice. I believe that is a very much a pro-choice statement, which is fine. I believe that candidates should pick a side and let people know where they fall. Proposed having a 15 justice court with 5 Democrat, 5 appointees, and 5 selected by an agreement of the other 10 justices. Interesting. So the Supreme Court, which has been around essentially as long as the country has been around, should now be completely changed to follow the bipartisan group of 5 from each party and then 5 that are picked by the other justices. Electoral College, supporting of abolishing it. Now, one of the things that always gets me about people who want to get rid of the Electoral College is as soon as you go to popular vote, I believe there are 26 counties in the U.S. which actually have the 50% of the population within them. Or is it 126 counties? I don't know. It's a very limited area around a few major cities that would hold the popular vote. So you wouldn't need to campaign across the majority of the U.S. You wouldn't need any of the flyover states, anything other than a few places in New York, New Jersey, Florida, Texas, outside of Chicago, and then in California. That would be the entire campaign trail, and the rest of the country would just have to accept whomever was picked. As a person in one of those smaller states, I don't like that idea, because then what's the point of the majority of the states in the union if the outer edge picks who controls all of us, or picks the president? I've never been big on that. And finally, I'm sorry, I didn't know I skipped this one. Buttigieg's stance on college cost. He has concerns about soaring student loan debt and believes college is too expensive for too many people. He supports expanding the public service loan forgiveness program that clears up loans in exchange for public service work. Overall, I believe that if you go to college for a public service type job, or you end up in the public service group, meaning you're some of these people can be counselors, policemen, teachers. I do think that's a good thing, but if you go to college for one of the quote-unquote grievance studies, where it's strictly a very cultural, very internal, like journalism or something like that, where these are jobs you are trying to market yourself out with, I don't know that taxpayers should be paying for that, because it's kind of a double-edged sword. Now, you have someone who goes to school for something that there are no jobs in, or those jobs won't make any money. They're unable to afford the college, but they go anyway because they're able to secure the student loans. And then we say, well, you come work for the public. The public will now pay your salary and pay your college back, even though you went to college costs $100,000 or $70,000 a year in loans to get a degree in, let's say, art or something that's not specifically covered. Those should traditionally, and I believe realistically, should be for, we don't want to say rich people, but people who understand that money has to be paid back. And I would like to say, from my own experience, that college is not a necessary thing anymore. We have to change kind of the way the culture thinks about college, because a lot of college loans or a lot of college degrees are useless. A lot of people come out, work in trades. They actually go on the ground and in these more internship, these lower end jobs where they build themselves up through the company. And until our culture stops thinking of college as this supreme end-all be-all of life, I just don't see how it's ever going to stop. And ever since the government really got into funding more college loans, into securing college loans, you've seen the skyrocketing price of colleges across the U.S. You've seen education costs quadruple in what has been the last 10 to 20 years. You see the colleges just adding on new fees every year because they are guaranteed to get their money out of these students who can't file bankruptcy, who can't get out from under the debt ever. And if you sort of broke the college loan the security of college loans to where college students could now come out, if their degree is useless, then they could bankrupt it, I believe you'd see college cost plummet almost immediately, because these institutions, these big finance companies who've built their industry on the ability to, I don't want to say extort, but to extract this money regardless of situation from students. When the system was built on a few, every person in the country didn't go to college when these systems were built. And now that everyone thinks they have to go to college and they have to get into these prestigious schools, and then are unable to get a degree which will ever secure them any meaningful employment, if they were able to bankrupt them, divest them, get rid of them through traditional means of bankruptcy, you would see a massive change in how colleges market themselves, how they're able to charge fees, and how loans go. Would you still need a very, not a very small, but a program for people at the bottom end of society, people who don't have money, people who don't come from backgrounds? Yes. Those people then would have to, do X scores on tests and then be able to get into college and have more of a government subsidized education rather than a massive debt subsidized by themselves, when they're signing up for these things and they're 18 and they're going to college and they think they're going to rule the world. And they get out of college and realize the job they thought was there isn't there, and they were misled by the institution and by a lot of the higher ups in society. It's just not what it used to be. Anyway, that was my rant. I'm sorry I kind of got off on the track at the end there. Please like, share, comment, subscribe. Throw your thoughts in the area there at the bottom. I would really like to know what people think. Hope you have a wonderful day. And there you go. Pete Buttgieg currently tracking at 2% nationwide, possibly anywhere up to 32% if he's the only candidate. But Axios did a big spread on him and gave zero pushback the entire time. That was my take when I watched the video.